I'm just going to ask broadly each of you to tell us what sparked interest in kind of starting a career in nonprofit sector. Was it accidental or more something that you actually consciously thought about? And just talk a little bit about your progression of career and how a graduate degree may or may not change the progression. Right. So thank you so much. Whoever wants to go first.
Go for it. Sure, I will get us started. Yeah, I entered my undergraduate thinking I wanted to be a social worker. So I sort of always had a passion for service that way. I was very involved in service in high school, and it was the career path that just sort of spoke to me. I had sort of a situation in my personal life. My best friend's parents were foster parents. I sort of lived at their home as a second home. There were many nights we had sleepovers, and a social worker would show up at the house at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and drop off a kid. And spending time in their home, I saw this social worker as sort of the one constant in these kids' life, and I just wanted to be that. It was sort of a job that spoke to me, and I decided that's what I was going to pursue. I spent 4 years earning a degree in sociology, intended to go get my master's in social work, and needed a break from school. It was 4 years, it was a lot, and I just wanted to kind of go home and work and figure out school later. And my first job experience was doing case management work. So I was able to join the staff of a small nonprofit. It was a private nonprofit, very small, very nimble. And I was hired on as a caseworker, case manager, and it took me probably less than 6 months to determine that I just didn't want to do that. So it was a really fortunate experience for me because it showed me what I didn't want to do, which I think was equally as important. You know, I look at my career sort of journey, learning what I don't want to do is just as important as the things that have spoken to me. But what it did give me was I landed at an organization that I was incredibly passionate about. I saw the nonprofit world from the inside, and I knew I could make a difference for that organization. And so I sort of navigated into an administrative role. I was an admin assistant for an executive director who was a compassionate person. She was a visionary person. She was not organized, and she was not a planner. And those were the skills I was able to bring in. So I worked under her leadership for about a year, and then eventually took over as executive director of that organization. And so, when I look at that initial spark, I wouldn't have ended up at that organization at the Johnny Cake Center without that. And it definitely, it lit a passion point that put me in the right place for me to be able to kind of tap into what my own skill set was and figure out, how to make that work, and how the organization could benefit from what I brought to the table. So anyway, that was my spark.
Your spark.
Mm-hmm.
Well, similarly, I started school thinking I wanted to go in and, save the world, and small goals. My parents did that kind of work. My dad had a career in the YMCA world, and so working with people in some capacity was definitely in the cards for me. I went to Springfield College, and they have a very strong program training people that want to go into YMCA work. And YMCA work is very broad. It's, if you want to be somebody who works in the finance department and accounting, or if you want to work in aquatics or summer camp or school-age childcare or health and wellness or membership and sales, marketing, there's like something for everyone in that realm, still nonprofit, still meeting the needs of the community. And it's really a happy place, because a lot of nonprofits deal with the case management work, and you go home and you bring it with you. And unless you're really wired in a special way, it's very hard to separate all of that. So I graduated college and went on just like my dad and had a wonderful career with the YMCA. And I guess I didn't dream beyond that. It was just so rewarding and so fulfilling for me that every job I had, I thought I had arrived. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to be doing. And I was working with kids in childcare, and then I started becoming more of an administrator, and then I was in charge of youth services, and so supervised people. And one thing led to another in terms of degree of responsibility, you know, and doing budgets and things that weren't so much fun or heart-wrenching or anything like that, but they needed to be done, and you had to know how to do it well so that the people, the heart-wrenching side of it, benefited from all of that. And so once you see the whole picture, you want more, you know, like, oh, although I didn't like the budgeting piece, and I still don't, you knew how important it was to the success of the work that you're doing and the impact that you're going to have on the community. But I can remember I had annual review with my CEO at the Y. It was a big Y in Connecticut, and my boss said to me after a fairly decent review, he said, "So what's next for you?" And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he says, "Well, what's your next job?" And of course, I internalized it like, is this one over? You know, like, what are we talking about here? But he just wanted to prepare me for whatever the next job was. So if I wanted to be a CEO, he wanted to give me some responsibilities to kind of, you know, build up that skill set. And I said, I don't want to be a CEO. I was director of development. He gave me the opportunity to work with his board. So I built these great relationships with community volunteers that pushed the work along, and writing grants and meeting really cool people. I was out doing lunches, and I was like, they pay me to do this. Like, it was just so fun. I just loved what I was doing as director of development. And I said, yeah, I don't have any aspiration for the next step. And he said, yeah, but you got this skill set, and I think it would be a waste to keep you here. And I was like, well, I don't know about that. And he goes, well, give it some thought. So I figured, well, we won't be talking about that for another year. Well, fast forward maybe a month later, I received a call from somebody at YMCA of USA, and they said, hey, there's a CEO job open in Pennsylvania. Are you interested? I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, so that piqued my interest. I was like, ooh, go home, you know. And of course, I was flattered. And so when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I looked at the job description. I could do that. I've done that. Yeah, that's not too much of a stretch. Yeah, I'll apply. Can't hurt, you know. And I got the job, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a CEO. And it was like, I felt like I was young, green, all of that. And like, what in the world did they see in me, you know? So anyway, during my first year, I would call my old CEO back in Connecticut, and I said, okay, you didn't prepare me for this part. Why didn't you tell me about that? You know, but got through the first year. Truly some teary nights. There was some big stuff that we were dealing with because of the darn finances that kept getting in the way. And I needed to be way more savvy about that part of it. And I had a great board member who taught me, you know, how to do like tricks on how to do certain things and how to push through it and what to look for when you're reading the financials. And he helped me tremendously. And so, you know, like sidebar, little whisper to all of you, if you can find somebody who will be a mentor to you or somebody who can really coach you on the side, take it, take the help, and don't be a know-it-all because you don't know it all. Nobody does. And even if you say, well, I've done this before, I don't need to listen to their advice, there will always be a nugget of what they say that can help you improve or polish and just transform you to being, you know, a really, really great leader. So once I had that, I'll say that rough first year as a CEO, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I felt it like a calling, you know. I was just like, man, this is great because I get to boast about the team that's in aquatics and the team that takes care of childcare and the summer camp program and the creative and innovative program development that's going on. And it was definitely a spark that was lit and, you know, stayed with me for the longest time. So that was that. Getting the help and somebody else to see where my value was.
Okay, so I guess what was the next stage? Like, what made you think about a graduate degree? I mean, you have careers, seems like you learning on the job. It doesn't require necessarily a full-blown master's degree. What made you?
Yeah, so I started with the Johnny Cake Center fresh out of college. I was 21 years old. I became the executive director of that organization at 23 and spent the next 7 years learning how to run an organization. So I was young. The organization was at this transition point. When I started, it was 2008. It was the height of the housing recession. We were seeing our client roles go up and up and up, while our funding was going down and down. You know, our donors, our corporate and private donors, had less capacity to give. We had more need. It was just sort of this crazy time where everything we were doing was like putting out a fire. It was disaster management for just a couple of years. And as an organization, it was an older organization. It was 45 years old at that point. It was just sort of baby in the sense that it was really volunteer run. It was originally founded by churches. It was very sort of small in the way it was run. And it took a long time to kind of just establish ourselves as a resource regionally and do things like write an employee manual and like just have just revise bylaws and bring them up to date and like all of these things that sound small, but it was a lot of work to kind of rebuild a board and a more powerful board and get an actual website. And so it was just like these real these real like logistical things that I was working on for a couple of years. Like once we got out of like the hot zone, really kind of focus on those. And through that process, I was growing an organization. We were expanding the programs we were offering. We were expanding our staff. We had a social enterprise thrift store that became our single largest donor. I actually just heard from them. They had their first $100,000 month, like $100,000 in sales in a single month. And I can remember when we broke 10,000 in sales. It's amazing. And so like learning how to grow a business, nonprofit, it was a great time. And then at some point it just became a little routine for me. Like I felt like I had brought this organization as far as my vision would allow it to go, I guess. And I guess where I wanted to take the organization, our board didn't, right? So I spent 10 years with my staff, with our volunteers, really addressing social issues, right? People are hungry, people are struggling with housing. And I kind of got to the point where I realized, we're just kind of band-aiding these, right? We're throwing money at these problems. You're hungry, we're going to feed you. You can't pay your rent. Come here, we'll pay a bill for you. But we're not really advocating on behalf of our clients. We're not making any sort of overall larger structural change. And I really wanted to expand into more of an advocacy component to our work, and our board didn't. My board didn't. They really sort of felt like that was too far of a shift from our mission, and I honestly was just a little bit bored doing what it became a little easy, and I needed a new challenge, and that was really my inspiration to go and say, all right, this is time. I think there was also, I was a little naive in the sense that, I had sort of lucked into this job. Like literally I had graduated from college. I went home to bartend and drive the beer cart on the golf course like I did every single summer. Summer was winding down and everyone else was going back to college. And I had this realization that I was like, oh, I'm an adult now. I have a degree. Like I'm supposed to go do something with this. And I sent just a random email to this organization saying, hey, like, this is what my degree's in. This is what I'm passionate about. Do you have any opportunities for me? And that's how I ended up at the Johnny Cake Center, and eventually like became their executive director, and was able to, like, I had this amazing gift, right? To be able to grow this organization and grow myself through that process. I sort of was naive in the sense that I felt like that would just keep happening to me, and it doesn't. So I didn't really realize how lucky I was to have found that so quickly and find something that drove at my passion point. So it wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't hard to leave. I did feel like I was leaving my baby, but I was so optimistic about what else was out there and continuing to kind of, wanting to be in a place that I was continuing to be challenged. And so that was the sign for me that it was time to go back. I should say I had been thinking about grad school really ever since I disappointed my parents 10 years earlier and didn't go get that degree, and was trying to sort out how I was going to be an executive director, run an organization, and do school at the same time. And it just did not line up for me. And so it was really that, okay, this chapter of my life is coming to a close. I'm ready to start my next chapter. It's a great time for me to go get my master's. So yeah, that was my sign.
That's great.
Yes.
So what I neglected to mention about the Y job where I was a CEO for the first time was that financially they were completely crippled. They were losing money consecutively for 4 or 5 years before I arrived. So that's what the uphill climb was for me. But having kind of mastered that, I felt so proud and accomplished. And I was like, okay, bring me more, kind of like what you were saying, like, give me the big stuff, and then when it gets to that kind of, I'll say, plateau of running smooth, it's like, that's boring.
Isn't that
Yeah, just give me more. I can do so much more because I had to. And so then that became my normal pace. So when it did settle and pick up its own kind of rhythm, I wanted more. So I worked the staff really hard that first probably 2.5 years of, we've got to turn the corner. You can't spend money on this. And, just teaching them a new way of doing things. And so they were all leaning in and seeing the success of it. They were really excited. They're like, oh, if we do this, then we could that, and so I got them as fired up as I was about all of it until I realized that enough was enough for them, because like I was saying, I wanted more, and they were saying, Joanne, we are exhausted. Like, you have tapped us for all we're worth. And I think we either need a break or you just need to stop, And I'm looking at the financials thinking, okay, we're running in the black and we're fine, but it's not sustainable. Like, we don't have any resilience factor put in there. And I'm wondering, with local YMCAs all around us that are contiguous, I wonder if we should talk about a merger and come together with another Y. Because when you have a small YMCA, in my scenario, I was the CEO, I was the director of development, we had a bookkeeper. It wasn't a CFO. It was just somebody who was able to keep the books straight. So I had to really be the eyes over that, which was my scary point. I was marketing. I mean, I was doing, so many things, and you're not really allowed to be a specialist. You have to be jack of all trades, specialist in none. And it started to show, because we didn't have a great website. You talked about building the website. We didn't have great board governance in terms of the bylaws and the board expectations and the recruitment plan, because I was just kind of touching the water. Think about a water fly, it just stays on the surface. I wasn't allowed to dive in deep to really do some powerful things. So merging would have allowed me to be a really good either director of development or CEO that kind of works closely with all of that board governance, thing. So there was certainly some skill sets that were my favorites, and others I did just because they needed to be done. And I thought if I could marry that with another CEO who also had a complementary skill set, toolbox, we could be pretty powerful. And then my team and their team could become specialists. And then we would all just be singing Kumbaya and love our jobs, because they got to really dive deep. So we talked with a neighboring YMCA. They were very interested. We talked to them for a really long time, like over a year, and had so many volunteer-driven meetings. And we got to the point where a merger just wasn't in the cards. I went into it very open that I didn't have to be the CEO. I didn't have the ego about that. I just wanted to do the things I loved and that I felt I could contribute. The other person felt that she needed to be the CEO. That was very important to her. And we started the conversation making that very clear. Not a big deal. So I knew that I was not going to be the CEO. Didn't bother me at all. But as we got farther down into the year of negotiating, my board said, we don't really like her. And so it really became a personality thing. They didn't see her skill set. They didn't see her leadership ability to be the one to take our why. And so we all kind of backpedaled. My board said, okay, we can keep going forward as long as Joanne's the surviving CEO. And her board was like, nope, that's not what we, anyway, that fell apart. So my board chair says to me, well, let's turn to the east and see if this Y. And I said, whoa, time out. Like, let's not just merge for merger's sake. It needs to make sense. But anyway, so we did venture into a conversation with the YMCA to the east. Their CEO was maybe 15 years older than me, and he had, that many more years experience and that sort of thing. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he's like, let's do it. He had 3 branches under his Y. I had 2 under mine. And so we started to merge. At the same time all of that was happening, I started it used to be an old grocery store, and I turned it into a YMCA, like a fitness center and a program space and after school activities. So we took the old grocery store, renovated it. And so we did the construction, we did the marketing of it, and it was super exciting. Meanwhile, another plate we were spinning is a capital campaign to put a shovel in the ground, a piece of property, to actually build a real, honest to goodness YMCA. But we wanted this, we called it the Annex. We wanted the shopping center Y to start to gain membership while we started to build the Y, and then we would shut down the shopping center, transition all the members to the real building. So at the same time, Springfield College, my alma mater from my undergrad, sent out a relationship notice with the YMCA of the USA and said, we want to promote a master's program, executive master's program for higher end leaders in the YMCA to kind of go back to our roots of being an international YMCA training school. And it will only cost, I don't know how much it was, like $15,000, something ridiculously inexpensive. And I said, I had 2 young kids at the time. I'm building this annex, campaigning for the big thing, merging. I was like, no way. But then they said, and with a $10,000 scholarship from YUSA, and I was like, oh, maybe, and so back to me being like, I want more. Well, I got what I asked for, and I went back to school. And it was a program that was just perfect for me at that time, because my thesis was on how to merge your Y. So it was perfect to be researching and reading and writing and doing all at the same time. So it was just a beautiful mix.
So I was living and working in Rhode Island, and I just was so stinking lucky. So I ended up doing it was an MPA program at Brown University. It's part of the Watson Institute of International Public Service. I should know this, I don't. And it's a 1-year intensive program. Full-time.
Yeah.
And it was, so they carved 2 academic years or compressed 2 academic years into 1 calendar year, which I didn't even realize. So when I applied to the program, I thought I was starting in September, and we were we were doing a huge renovation of our facility. So it was a multi-million-dollar upgrade on our food pantry. Like, it was insane. And I was also the president of my Rotary Club at the time. So for like so it started June 1st and graduated like May 31st the following year. And for the first 2 months of that program, I was still an executive director, and like, it was nuts. But that's just poor planning on my part.
You're not recommending that part.
No, and like, read the website and the materials, I guess I would say. But yeah, so it was full-time in person, and it's what I wanted, right? So I had an undergraduate experience that was great in person. I knew I wouldn't be accountable enough to myself to be able to do an online program. The other thing about it too is, the program I took was really geared towards working professionals. The idea was you to kind of take a year out of your working life, go, get this new accreditation, this new skill set, and return back to the field. And that's really what I wanted. So it worked for me, just sort of that timeline and how, where I was at with my career. Yeah, and so how this pushed my career trajectory. So, I sort of had mentioned earlier that I wanted to move into more systems change type work, and I wasn't finding that within my own nonprofit. And I really was starting to think, all right, if the change I'm looking to create isn't happening sort of at that micro nonprofit level, I really want to focus on the systems and the structure and think more sort of governmental and try and drive policy that way. And so that's really where where I was looking to go. So an MPA made sense. Brown's MPA program is actually a master's in public affairs. I don't know if there's any other MPA that's a public affairs, but essentially what they did was say, all right, public policy and public administration, they don't exist in silos. These are things that go together. And so it really braided public policy and public administration under sort of one hat. And it was extremely data focused. And that was, we should be using data to drive policy. So it just sort of checked a lot of boxes for me. I left there, and it actually took me a little while to kind of land again. And although I wasn't expecting or looking for this, I ended up working for another nonprofit again. So I left in 18, I'm sorry. My undergraduate was 08. I graduated with my master's in 2018 and landed at a 501c3 called Thames River Innovation Place. It was, I refer to it as a quasi-state organization. So 100% of our budget was written into the state of Connecticut's budget for innovation and entrepreneurship. And we launched a program for 2 cities around innovation and economic development. It was fascinating in the sense that I really got to see what a state is not capable of doing in terms of like driving innovation, being nimble, being responsive to community need. I was doing this during the pandemic. And so when you see these sort of systems that they're not built in a way, like they're so stuck with these like checks and balances that are built into the system, that they're not able to move and be responsive and pivot very quickly, which is what innovation and entrepreneurship requires. So it's just sort of a fascinating time for me. Again, another point for me to say, okay, this isn't quite the right fit that I was looking for, but it certainly pointed me in the direction where I've landed now. And it was interesting for me to work in a space that was like sort of just adjacent to where my passion point was, right? Like, so I'm fascinated with social entrepreneurship. I'm fascinated about using the market as a way to address social issues. And this was just sort of adjacent to this. The focus for Thames River Innovation was around blue tech. So similar to Hampton Roads, we have a huge Navy base up in Groton, Connecticut. That is sort of one leg of a stool that we're trying to stand up there around blue tech. My dad is an engineer on submarines. My partner at the time was a cob on submarines. Like, blue tech was sort of in my world, and I could care less about it. And like, it was just interesting to work in a place that was just on the side of what I'm passionate about, and realize that wasn't enough. It wasn't fulfilling enough, and motivated me to take the skills I learned there and bring them to another organization.
Cool. So the type of program that I had was really the only reason I could say yes to move forward with it, because it was a hybrid. And now I graduated in 08. So that's before hybrid was even like a thing, right? We were forced to become that recently, but this was innovative in the way that it was hybrid. It was a 2-year program, and we met 4 times in person for 2 weeks straight. And so I basically had to ask my board and my husband, would it be okay if I checked out for 2 weeks straight? And I'm not a wife, I'm not a mom, I'm not the CEO, and whatever other responsibilities I had to check out and be 100% present in class. During the 2 weeks, we had 4, I'll say 4.5 classes times 4 in the 2 years time span. And the half class is because it was a common thread in every semester, and it was the thesis basically. And the professor was helping us, craft it. The first semester was, what's your concept? What's your outline going to look like? And then start to beef it up. And then she would just kind of walk through it with us and red pen it all over the place. But, the end product was really pretty powerful, and you walked away pretty proud of it. But the other classes, remember, everybody in the class all worked for the YMCA. So even after class, it was done at like 5 o'clock or whatever, we'd all go out to dinner because we were all in a city that wasn't our own. We all flew in from all over the country, and the learning continued, not only a spillover of the conversation during the day, but hey, I have this problem at the Y, what do you all do? And then you're like ferociously taking notes and like, oh, wow, I have homework tonight. I can't keep talking about this, and so you go back. And so that's like 2 weeks, really super intense, jam-packed with the teachers. And what we liked about it is that we got a relationship with the teacher. And then from that point on, it was online, but you already felt this loyalty to the teacher. It wasn't, just a computer screen teacher. It was a real honest to goodness teacher that, went to lunch with us and sometimes went to dinner with us, and, a real relationship. And because we're all adults, they were our age, they just happened to be the subject matter expert. And that made it really pretty valuable as well. Seeing them as human, way less intimidating than my undergrad. So then the 2 months following that 2 weeks, everything was, this week your homework assignment is, and part of our grade was how interactive you were on the online system. So that was the only way it was going to work. My board agreed, my family agreed that would be fine. And it worked beautifully. I was able to juggle all of it. And like I said, it guided me through merging my Y, because I was able to dig in and research and get the credit from school, but actually use hardcore data for what I was doing during the day. And the second question was, oh, how did it help me? So one thing, how it helped me in my career, having had the opportunity to dive deep, is again, in my world, you stay at the waterfly level, and you're just spinning plates that are in front of you, and it's crisis du jour a lot of times, and you don't get the opportunity to drill deep. So when I was in school, I was doing the waterfly business during the day at work, but then diving deep on those particular topics. And the topics, because it was geared for YMCA leaders, were all related to what I did during the year. So there was one deep dive on capital campaign, one deep dive on how to do your audit, and the relationship you have with your 990, and all these things that are so important to us being successful. So because I had the opportunity to dive deep, I felt more ready in the real world of interacting in all of those areas. And another bonus that came from it is those 20 other students became best friends for life, because we went through an event together, and it's been fun watching our careers blossom. And we all have text circle of we've been Zooming during COVID. We would get together periodically, and so that's just a really nice kind of bonus.
I'll dovetail on that too. The program I did at Brown was very much a cohort model. So every single student started at the same time. We took, with the exception of a couple electives, we were all in the same classes together. We traveled the world together. There's a global policy experience, and it was such an intensive program in terms of what had to get done in a year. And because of that, classes were not traditional. So I was up in Providence from 9 in the morning till my last class might get out at 6. And then you have these, you have work to do, and you're all doing it collectively, collaboratively together. And so those relationships that I formed are still a part of my personal and professional life. And I don't know that if I was in a larger program, I would have found that same.
Maybe 1 or 2 people, but not the cohort. Yeah.
Sure. So how did I end up at Volunteer Hampton Roads? So I moved down here in January. I was coming off of 3 years with an organization that I wasn't super passionate about. And I really, I was very lucky in the sense that I didn't have a tremendous amount of pressure to start work right away. And so I wanted to really take time to get to know the area. It was my first time living outside of New England. So just to get to know the region, the organizations that were out here, and take time to really find the right fit for me. So I was interviewing pretty consistently for about 3 or 4 months before deciding on Volunteer Hampton Roads. My last 2 roles, I had been serving as executive directors of nonprofits, so that's kind of where my head was. But when I came across the opening at Volunteer Hampton Roads, and I was reading a bit about what the organization did, it just sort of spoke to what I wanted to be doing. So, so I serve as the VP of Community Engagement. I hover in between our nonprofits and our for-profit members. it puts me in that sort of market space, like thinking about market sustainable solutions for social problems. Like that's what I want to be doing. And that's a space that Volunteer Hampton Roads will be moving into. I also just really thought the opportunity to work with, we have several hundred nonprofit members that it's my job to get out and get to know and be in their space and learn about what they're doing and figuring out how we can help build the capacity and make connections into our corporate world to really grow the potential for these organizations to do their good work. And so what better way for me to get to know Hampton Roads than to like go meet all the nonprofits doing cool things here. So that was really exciting for me. And, feeling like, I've seen sort of that nonprofit sector, I've seen that sort of quasi-state sector really wanting to learn about what corporations are thinking, how are their sort of corporate brains working when they're thinking about, their social responsibility, what it means to be a corporate citizen, and how I can be in the room at the table having those conversations to drive that in a way that what I think they should be doing, right? And that just seemed like an opportunity I couldn't pass up. And so anyway, so that's how I landed at Volunteer Hampton Roads earlier this summer. I think this is month 4 for me. So yeah.
So I'll take it from where I left off. I successfully merged my YMCA and wrote myself a 2-year contract as the VP of Strategic Initiatives because the CEO, the guy who was 15 years older, remained the CEO. And life was good for about at least the first year, because there was a lot of transition happening and kind of one-off kind of projects to help things settle and find their new rhythm. And then I realized you can't really have 2 CEO heads in the same room. So I knew it was time for me to go, and brushed up my resume, got a position as a CEO at a YMCA in New Jersey. And similar to your story where you were ready for the next thing, and the board was like, yeah, no, we're not going down that road, and so I said for myself that one of the most rewarding things I did in my work with the Y was reaching into the community and supporting other nonprofits in one way or another. I built these relationships. I was involved in Rotary and, just whatever was going on in the community, I was part of it. I was your, typical community leader. I wanted what was best for the most. And so I thought, when I'm happiest is when I can take a kind of floundering nonprofit and help build them up and show them board governance tricks and help them rewrite their bylaws and help them with fundraising and fund development, as a foundation to their work, and coach them on certain supervisory issues or help them craft their new strategic plan. And I thought, why don't I just do that for work? And so I said goodbye to my 31-year career with the YMCA and took a huge gamble that I could make it work. And very silly because my kids were both in college. But anyway, I did it and I loved it. I just loved what I was doing. And I thought, man, I didn't know that was going to happen for me. I didn't know I was going to have this second thing. But what I didn't enjoy is the bookends of doing that. I didn't enjoy going after my next gig and constantly selling myself. That felt ugly, And I didn't like chasing the money to go get paid. And then, you have to do taxes differently and all of that stuff. So back to, not enjoying finances, it just stayed with me. But, I was used to having a team of people that would do the marketing for the next gig. And I was used to having a finance team. And so all of a sudden it was all on me. But anyway, the work in the middle of it all is what drove me to continue to tolerate those bookends. And then I was doing some work for a client and was talking with a recruiter about my client who was looking for new work. And the recruiter told me about a job that she thought would be suited for me. And she said, are you looking? And I said, no. And she said, no, I think you should consider this. And I was like, no. And she said, no, let me just tell you about it. And I said, fine. So she said, well, let me start with, you'd have to move. So I'm living in North Jersey at this point. And I said, well, it depends where. And she said, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. And I said, oh, go on. And I sat up and I listened very intently because I love this area. And like you, I hadn't moved outside of the Northeast. I hadn't lived this far south. So, but I was intrigued. I love the Chesapeake Bay and, you know, everything. Anyway, so I said, it was very secondary what the job was. No, I said, what is the job? And she explained it to me, and it was a little bit cloudy what the planning council is. And so I applied, got an interview, maybe 5. And then when I got the job, on the job is when I realized that the work was a little bit different from what the board thought it was. And that's often the case. So you have to know how to ask a lot of questions and how to be a detective and drill into other people other than the ones you're actually interviewing, just as they should about you, you know, to check references beyond your list. But I realized that my priorities are board development, did that, program development, I've done that, and fund development, I've done that. It doesn't matter if you're selling widgets or teaching kids how to swim, I know how to do those things. So they were looking for a true leader, somebody with a business sense that can guide them, because the team there had the skill sets that were specific to the actual work. And so it didn't matter what I brought in regard to that piece. And so it's just been, it's been 7 months and just a delightful opportunity for me to learn all kinds of new things because I didn't work with people that were experiencing homelessness. I never worked with people that were working with military families with kids with special needs. I never worked with USDA and putting nutritious food in front of children. I mean, in the YMCA, we dealt with childcare, but we didn't have a food program. So all of this is new for me and really super exciting. So I've been really happy. So when she connected the two of us to be the panelists, we got together and we realized neither of us are from here. Neither of us know anybody. And so we're so excited to have new friends.